How are you? Pretty good. Thanks. What's up? Oh, careful. The steps are tough. I've done that before, so don't feel too bad. You looking for Amari? Looking for Amari? Oof. Yeah, I don't know. Gonna miss a fun one. Thanks for being here on time. Tom, I prefer a sleepy Amari over no Amari. All right, it's 2 o'clock, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. I want to say thank you all for being here on time. This is a much better turnout at 2 o'clock than last week, so I really appreciate that. All right, we're going to talk about chapter 11 today, which is one of my favorite chapters because it involves the psychology of management. So there's actually a lot of cool things we can learn about ourselves. Probably most of what you'll learn out of this chapter that I think you're going to appreciate is self-reflection. We'll learn about our own personality traits, our personal tendencies, why we tend to do things. But we'll also use that information to figure out how we can manage other people if they have different personalities than us or different values than us. So a lot of cool stuff, hopefully, you'll find in this chapter. Collectively, we're going to call this like psychology stuff individual differences. When we talk about managing like organizational psychology, we're talking about why are people different? That includes personality and values, and how do we account for that if we're their managers? So first off, they have officially confirmed our final exam time. It's almost always this time. This is actually the same time I put in the syllabus, so it's not different than what you've seen before, but it's official. It's going to be Wednesday of finals week. That's the 6th from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. That's our time frame. However, the exam will be the same length as the midterm, so it'll be an hour and 15 minutes, unless you get an extended time because of an accommodation. If you have an accommodation, if you're one of those folks that need longer, I would recommend you use the DRC because at 5:30 we get kicked out. That's the end of our final slot. So I can't stay here with you. So book through the DRC and you'll get as much time as you need in private. It will be in person again and open notes and open book. It'll be almost exactly the same. So 50 questions that are required plus 10 extra credit questions. So you can earn up to 110%. And we'll do another day of study before we go into the final. I think what we'll do is we'll do the study guide. If you're here for the midterm, we filled out the study guide review together. So we said this definition for organizations, for example, is on slide 3 of chapter whatever. So we'll do that again, but I think we'll also do more like I'll review some questions with y'all as opposed to just saying, here's the pages. I think I'll go through some of the material more in depth. And I think that'll help us out more for the final exam, but it's not going to be any more challenging than the midterm. So you know what to expect. Any questions on the final exam? Yes, Iris?
So basically we should be finishing like around 4:45.
Yep. If you come at 3:30, 4:45. That's when your timer is going to expire. If you're a little late, that's okay. Like if you show up at 4 o'clock, you can still take the exam, but you have to be out of here by 5:30. That's the only other deadline. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, let's talk about chapter 11. Here are the learning objectives for today. We'll describe the importance of personality and other individual differences. We tend to talk about traits and personality. We'll look at values and attitudes and how that affects behavior. We'll look at perception and ways that perception can go astray. That's probably all we'll get through today. This is another 2-day chapter. So probably on Thursday, we'll talk about dealing with different employee attitudes, how to increase employee motivation and satisfaction. We'll look at workplace stress. We'll look at diversity, and then we'll talk about increasing our emotional intelligence for our career competency. All right, let's talk about personality first. There are many ways to look at personality. Probably the most famous is the Big Five. Have y'all heard of the Big Five before? Okay, only a few of you, it looks like. But we've all heard of extroversion, right? And introversion. We know if we're an extrovert or an introvert. At least we've been told if we're an extrovert or an introvert. And we'll talk about how those labels can describe us on our average behavior. We'll also talk about how those labels can be self-fulfilling prophecies, and sometimes we give them too much importance. But the good thing about having these labels, the Big Five is one of them, is it helps us understand how can we describe our personality with using just 5 adjectives. That's the Big Five personality traits. Core self-evaluations is another kind of way to define personality. It's just another trait, essentially, as is emotional intelligence. So when we look at this, these are essentially 7 personality traits that we can use to describe ourselves. But just think of personality overall as a description of our behavior. What I want to do first is start with the self-assessment. For 2 this chapter, I just want y'all to do the first one on the Big Five traits. We'll take about 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll discuss those. So let's do that right now. Anyone still working on this? All right, let's discuss. Well, first let's review some of the big 5 personality traits, then we'll discuss. I know the results gave you some information. We'll go over that as well as elaborate on that, and then we'll ask some discussion questions. First, let's review what the big 5 are. These are the probably the most popular personality framework for describing people using 5 adjectives. So extroverted, agreeable, conscientious, emotionally stable, also known as not neurotic. Neurotic is the former term, but it's not as PC. And open to experience. So there are a few descriptors up here that help us understand kind of what the essence of these are. For example, if you're extroverted, you might be described as outgoing, sociable, assertive. One way to think about extroverted people and to assess if you're extroverted is to ask yourself, do you fill your personal battery in social situations? Like when you go to a party, does that make you feel more alive afterwards, or does it drain you? If it drains you, you're probably low on extroversion, aka an introvert. Okay. Agreeableness. We can describe an agreeable person as someone who's trusting, good-natured, cooperative, someone who's a good team player and gets along with the rest of the group. Conscientious would be dependable, responsible, achievement-oriented. This might be described as a hardworking person, someone who's diligent and gets the job done. Emotionally stable. Again, that's the opposite of neuroticism. It used to be, we called this neuroticism, but if you call someone a neurotic, that makes them feel bad. No one wants to be neurotic. If you're neurotic, that means you are not relaxed, you're insecure, you're worried, you're a worrisome person. So if you're emotionally stable, you're not those things. You're more kind of aloof. And then openness to experience, that's imaginative, curious, and broad-minded. So we'll go through how these might apply to our behaviors and how they might define us as individuals. But one quick note is if you rearrange these and you replace emotional stability with neuroticism, it spells out canoe, the first letters. So an easy way to remember this is canoe or ocean. So those are the big 5. All right, so I have a question for y'all. Which of these, I think this gave it to you in the feedback, if you read real closely, but which of these is most valued by employers, do you think? Yes, Iris?
I think it's constant, because managers always need employees that are dependable, responsible, and achievement-oriented.
Yes. Yep. Conscientiousness, that's a hard word to say. Conscientiousness is the most valued by employers. All right. What about for leader candidates? Which of these will make you the best candidate for a leadership role? Which one? It might help. Yeah, that's good. Is it Danya? All right. And Taha? Yes, those will all help in certain ways. Let me just ask you, why do you say openness to experience? Yeah, I would say that's definitely true in certain industries. Like if you're in a very creative, like tech industry, you need to be more open to experience. But what about if you're running a farming industry? Do we need to be open to experience in the farming industry as much? Probably not. We have pretty established methods for getting things done. So I definitely like where your head's at. And Cotter is saying agreeableness. I can see that as well. If you're a team player, you tend to get seen as someone who's going to be able to lead, and you might get pushed into a leadership role as a result of that. Eric, do you have a thought, or you just? Yeah, we definitely don't want to have a neurotic leader. You guys all have really good points. The research says, yes, they're all good, but these 2 in particular are very important to becoming a leader. So being extroverted, why do you think being extroverted helps become a leader? Yeah, really? Yeah, you're sort of making an argument for extroversion. Yeah, we have to talk to people, and also agreeableness. Yes, we have to get along with people. I agree with you 100%. We have to be able to speak up and get along. What the research shows is that if we're extroverted, we tend to speak our ideas more freely, and then we're perceived as a leader. That's one of the reasons that men tend to get leadership roles over women, even though they're equally qualified, is that men tend to be more extroverted, and so they just speak up. Women have equally valuable ideas, and they could lead equally effectively. We'll see that later on. The research shows that we can be equally effective leaders. However, because extroverts talk out more, people say like, oh, that person seems confident, let's make them a leader. That doesn't always mean they're the best leaders. In fact, research suggests that introverts make better leaders. Just because you speak up and you're very vocal about your ideas doesn't mean your ideas are the best. All right. And conscientiousness, that should make sense if our best employees are conscientious. We want our leaders to be diligent and thorough and do a good job. All right. Let's look at this next one. What do you think makes you a better teammate? These 5. Yeah, Eric? I agree with that. Being open will help you be more collaborative with your teammates. What else? All right. Yeah, if you're a better worker, you're going to contribute to the team's success. Yeah, I like that. It sounds like we're stating what we like in our teammates. We like our teammates to be responsible and conscientious and open to ideas. So I like that. Sometimes in your answer to these questions, you kind of betray your own, what's what I'm looking for, preferences. The research suggests that agreeableness is by far the top. The top predictor of teamwork is just being agreeable. And it kind of goes with what Eric was saying for his justification. Like if you are willing to go with the flow, listen to your teammates and kind of contribute to their ideas, people are going to perceive you as a better teammate. Okay. And like Mike said, being conscientious is very helpful, really in all contexts, but especially teamwork. All right, I think this is the last one of these discussion questions. But which of these do you think is the best in predicting innovation and adaptiveness? Eric? Yeah, that's exactly right. So openness to experience. If we're more open to ideas, we'll try things out. We might be more innovative and take a risk and hope that it works. All right. I think we've done enough of these. But if you want to survive a global pandemic, you should be emotionally stable, not neurotic. All right, let's do another, let's change gears here a bit and talk about how it could look to be too high in these traits. In general, especially in the organization context, it's good to be high in conscientiousness, agreeableness, openness, but you could be too high in these. Can somebody pick just one of these and say, what would it look like to be too high? Yeah, Rabisha? Yes, exactly. So you're a people pleaser at that point. Any other thoughts? Yes. That's actually what I was thinking of, is you're just obnoxious. If you don't stop talking, it's like, all right, we get it. Does someone raise hand over here? Were you going to say something similar? Yes, that's very true. That's the downside of being too extroverted. Here's some descriptors I just thought of. These are just examples. So you could be obnoxious, wishy-washy, like your vice just said. If you're too conscientious, you could be a perfectionist or type A, and that could rub people the wrong way. If you're too emotionally stable, you might be aloof or impassionate. And then if you're too open, you could be impulsive. So one of the points I want to make here is that when we talk about personality, we tend to think like, oh, I wasn't high on extroversion. I need to work on that. That's not necessarily true. Too much of these can be bad. In addition, sometimes being the opposite can also be beneficial. So if we are the opposite of extroverted, let's say we're introverted. I mentioned earlier that they sometimes are better leaders because they're more reflective. They don't just shout things out, they think things through. So in some situations, being the opposite of one of these big 5 can be a benefit. I think the feedback talked about Abraham Lincoln as being low in emotional stability. He was like very moody and reactive, and yet he was still one of like our most famous presidents. So arguably, or almost objectively, an effective leader. I wanted to include this. This is a theory that's not mentioned in the chapter, but I think it's a really cool way to look at personality, as long as you don't get overwhelmed, because it's a pretty overwhelming graphic to look at. This is called whole trait theory, and the core here is this this like bell curve here, which says that individuals display certain levels of a trait. For example, extroversion. You're not always a 7 out of 10 on extroversion. Some days you're a 9 out of 10 because you're feeling really energetic, and some days you're a 2 out of 10 because like your dog died or something. I don't know. You're not in a great mood. So if we map someone's extroversion, for example, over the course of 2 months, we might see that their average, if you can read these small numbers, maybe their average is an 8 out of 10. And sometimes they're more than that. Sometimes they're less than that. Sometimes they're a 30 or a 3 out of 10. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of this theory, it says that there's a lot of influences that determine how much or how little extroversion you use in a certain day, or openness or agreeableness. Things like the environment. So the weather, for example, can determine your mood. Interpretation of the situation. Maybe you're in a stressful situation and that causes your mood to be different, and you act differently than other days, or your average. Okay. But what I really like about this theory is the idea that we fluctuate on a day-to-day basis. So don't let one personality score that you took on one test define who you are as a person. Don't read too much into this, and realize that you're going to change day to day. Probably the biggest takeaway here. So we talked about the fact that people fluctuate. We talked about the fact that being high is not always a good thing. I think probably the biggest takeaway is that you can learn who you are on average as a person. And if you're aware, for example, that you're super extroverted, you can avoid the situations that like Cotter, and I think who was the other, Mahdi pointed out. It's like, if you're in a group setting and you're the only one talking, you might step back and think, all right, I'm extroverted, I'm being obnoxious. Maybe I'll like step back and let someone else talk. Or maybe you're an introvert and you're in a group meeting and you're thinking, I think I've got some good ideas. I know I tend to be introverted. Let me just see if I can speak up here and kind of put myself out there to share my ideas. Being aware of your average can help you overcome those, what can be the weaknesses of being high or low on each trait. Does that make sense? Probably the hardest thing to do is be self-aware, to recognize that, yes, I tend to be low, and in this situation, I need to be higher. But one thing you can do, which we've talked about a lot in this class, is use self-reflection. So look back on how you did in that situation, for example, and think about, was being extroverted the best thing to do in that situation? Or was I too agreeable in that team meeting? And then you can prepare for the next interaction. All right. I think that's enough about the Big Five. Talk about TSEs, or core self-evaluations. This is probably my favorite personality trait because it predicts a lot of performance outcomes. So on the job, if you have higher CSEs, you work harder. If you're on a sports team and your CSE is higher, you're going to do better. So it's a pretty important prediction of performance. And it's also just this reflection of how confident are we overall in our ability to perform. There are 4 dimensions of CSEs: self-efficacy, self-esteem, locus of control, and emotional stability. So self-efficacy is this belief that we can do something. And the research shows that if we cannot believe we can do something, we're going to be less likely to succeed. Self-esteem is more of a general personal regard. So in general, I think I'm good. Or in general, I think I'm a weirdo and no one likes me. That'd be a very self-defeating self-esteem to have. That would not be good for your performance. Locus of control, probably one we may or may not have heard of. Have you heard of locus of control? I think I learned about this midway through my college career. It's a very cool one to think about. There's 2 ways you can look at life. You can have an internal locus of control or an external. If you have an internal locus of control, you believe that you are the captain of your own fate. Like every consequence you face is a result of your own actions. So like, I got fired from my job. That's my fault because I didn't show up on time. If you have an external locus of control, you believe that you have no control over your fate and everything is externally determined. So if you get fired from your job and you have an external locus of control, you might blame your boss for not liking you. He's like, well, you know, it's not my fault. They just don't know how to run this place. That would be an external locus of control. This one's interesting because there's a lot of research that shows that if you have an internal locus of control, you tend to be more conscientious, for example. You tend to get promoted faster. You have higher wages because you take responsibility for your actions and you work hard to overcome obstacles. Why do you think someone with someone with an external locus of control, why would they not do as well with career outcomes? Connor? Might not be, you say accountable? Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. So they're not taking accountability for their failures. Instead of reflecting on how they can do better, they blame everybody else and they don't strive to improve. In general, it's good to have an internal locus of control, but there is such a thing as too much. If you take responsibility for every action, you can burn yourself out. You have to understand that sometimes things are out of your control, but as much as possible, take accountability. If y'all remember, I mentioned this book, Good to Great, and I talked about the window and the mirror principle. Do y'all remember that one? That was one of my favorites. For being a good leader, there's the window and the mirror. And the good leaders, they look out the window when things are going well. So they have an external locus of control. They say, things are going great because my team works hard, my employees are driven, they're competent. This is great. So they give praise. But when things are going poorly, they look in the mirror and they take an internal locus of control. And they say, well, I really should have done better in this situation. It's my fault that we're not doing as well as we could have been doing. So they kind of switch. And if they do that, people appreciate getting the credit when things go well, their employees, that is. And they also appreciate when a leader is self-critical when things don't go well. So, all right, let's get back to CSEs. The last one here is emotional stability, which we've already talked about. That's one of our big five. That helps determine your core self-evaluation. All right. I want to do an activity now. This will be a a class activity. Let me see how we're going to do this. All right, so what's going to happen? I'm going to pass out a small piece of paper. Everyone's going to get one. On the piece of paper, there'll be 3 words. I want you to not look at it when you first get it, so keep it face down. And then I'll say, all right, look at them all together, so don't look at it till I say so. There'll be 3 words that are anagrams. And an anagram is a word that you can rearrange to form a new word. So for example, ant, you can rearrange that to be tan. So all 3 words will be anagrams, and we're going to try to solve one anagram at a time. So I'll say, do the first one. Then when you finish the first one, raise your hand. Don't go on to the second. Just raise your hand when you finish the first. Then I'll say, all right, go to the second one. Is that clear? I think what we'll do, I want to pass these out in an efficient way. Okay. Just one. Just pick one. 3 words on each sheet of paper, only one. Keep passing. No, you're going to pick. Come on. Matt, right? That's not right. Peter. Yeah, you just want to. Everyone listen to that? They're okay with you? All right. Brian, you want Chewy, you got one? All right, here's what we're gonna do. Go ahead, turn it over. We're just gonna solve the first word. So only look at the first word, and when you've solved it, go ahead and raise your hand. Go ahead and raise your hand, keep your hand up once you solve the first word. And just keep it up. It's not meant to be super hard. So when you solve the first one, go ahead and raise your hand, keep it up for now. All right, we're gonna move on to the second. Just forget the first word. If you didn't get the first word, just forget it. Remember, it's not supposed to be this difficult. Just go to the second word. And when you finish the second word, raise your hand, keep it up. Just do the second word. And when you're finished, keep your hand up. Once you finish the second word, go ahead and keep your hand up. All right, shouldn't be too difficult. So when you finished it, raise your hand. All right, good. Let's move on to the third word. If you didn't finish the second, that's fine. Just forget about the second. Let's just do the third word. And when you've solved the third word, go ahead and raise your hand. No, not supposed to be too hard. Nice, Mike. All right, when you solve the third word, let me see your hand. Third word, yep. Once you solve the third word, it's not major. Okay, about 10 more seconds to solve the last word. All right. Go ahead and stop there. The experiment wasn't a huge success, but I want to tell you how what happened during the experiment. We had different sets of words. This is side two. Side two had insolvable words for the first and the second word. So they had whirl and slapstick. Those are not anagrams. This side had the easy words. They had bat and lemon. How would y'all have bat? What would that be? Tab. All right, what about lemon? No, yes, that's super easy. So they got super easy ones. And if you looked up, some of y'all looked up and noticed like, why are all their hands up and why are none of our hands up? And some of y'all were like, is this supposed to be easy? And I was kind of making fun of y'all and saying, don't think too hard. It should be easy. So I was setting y'all up for failure. But what we should have seen was on the third word, we all had the same third word. And what typically happens is the easy side has a much higher solve rate. We saw a few more hands go up on this side of the room. Did y'all get the third word? What was the third word supposed to be? American. So that's how we solved that one. And that's actually more challenging than bat and lemon. That's true. But if you're on this side, why would it be harder for this side to solve the third word, even though it's the same? So, you kind of already gave up. Yeah. What were y'all feeling? What do you say, Krista? Dumb? Yes. Frustrated? This is an example of learned helplessness. Have I heard of that term before? So learned helplessness, actually, let me display, well, we'll get to that in a second. Learned helplessness is when we are told or we experience frustration because we feel like I'm not smart enough. This is too challenging for me. And eventually, if we're told that enough, we just kind of give up and stop trying so hard. This is used to explain, and a lot of times, education disparities in America. In grade school, you get set on a track of either you're in the honors classes because you did really well on a test, or you get put in the remedial classes if you did really bad on a standardized test. And the people who get put in remedial classes tend to underperform, even though they have the capability. It's just because someone told them when they were 10 years old, you're stupid, so you go to the stupid class. So that has a lot of implications on our self-efficacy and our ability to perform well. I wanted to try to demonstrate that with this activity. If we think back to our 4 parts of core self-evaluation, which of the 4 do you think was most impacted by the frustration we felt? And I'll go back to the 4. Which of these 4 do you think suffered the most? Self-esteem, yeah? Is there another one? Yeah, both of those are highly affected. Self-esteem is more like a global self-perception. That's pretty hard to affect within a 3-minute activity. But definitely your self-efficacy was affected because you thought this task is just out of my ability, too hard for me to do. If you went through repeated interactions like this, where day to day you're told you're not good enough, then your self-esteem is going to suffer over the long run. So these can have cumulative effects on your core self-evaluation. Let's think about if you are a manager, what does that do to your employees? Or even a better first question, how could this manifest in the workplace? Like, why do you think people can have low core self-evaluations in the workplace? Have y'all ever felt frustrated at work? Like you felt, I don't know if I'm good enough for this job. No? All right, Mike, why did you feel that way?
Walking everybody around and going work. I worked at Chipotle and I couldn't roll for like a life.
All right.
Everybody around me could. So there you go.
Yeah. Sometimes just being the newcomer and you don't have the skills you need to do what others are doing. All right. Then the follow-up question is, if I'm a manager, let's say I'm Mike's manager at Chipotle, what can I do to boost his core self-evaluation in this situation? Training is one thing. Were you going to say training? Any other thoughts? Riley? Sorry, can you say that again a little louder? Ooh, yeah. I like that. So finding out some positives you can point out for them. You remember self-affirmation theory we discussed last week? We said sometimes you feel self-critical, but just remember the things you're good at. That can help you boost your overall self-esteem. So I like that idea. Any other thoughts? How to help Mike out with his rolling issue? Connor? Something else to do? Yeah, maybe his skill set, maybe he just can't roll for the life of him. So let's let him do something else. Yeah. You could put the ingredients on. Someone else will roll it for you. Yeah. That didn't help you learn how to roll. Yeah. That is tough. Well, sorry to hear that. That sounds frustrating. All right, here's some other things the book mentions we can do for our employees. So reinforce positive attributes. That's kind of exactly what Norelli said. Provide positive feedback whenever possible. Break larger projects into smaller tasks. Express confidence and provide coaching whenever possible. One thing I'll add to this, so in addition to like helping people learn the skills, trying to maintain their attitudes, particularly for Mike's situation, is to make sure employees don't compare themselves to senior employees. So if you're the new guy, I guess, all right, Mike, like these guys have been here for 6 months. Don't compare yourself to them. You do you, and I'll help train you on how to roll a burrito. That might be the best approach to take. All right. You're effective. If your employees have higher core self-evaluations, they will be happier. They'll stick around longer. They'll work harder. And overall, they'll be better at their job. So this is a huge thing you can do to help your employees is just help them believe in themselves. All right. Let's talk about emotional intelligence. This will be our last personality trait. I'm sure most of us have heard of emotional intelligence before. Is that correct? Has anybody not heard of this? Probably the most popular personality trait. It became really popular in the last 20 years. This is a way to describe our ability to carry out accurate reasoning about emotions and the ability to use emotions and emotional knowledge to enhance thought and action. So, for example, if you're able to realize that you're getting angry and realize that your anger is not justified and prevent yourself from losing your temper, then you are demonstrating emotional intelligence. People that have violent outbursts, like Mike Tyson, for example, you saw like this is like maybe a year ago, but he like threw something at someone on an airplane because he got mad at them. That's very low emotional intelligence. What are the discrete mentions of emotional intelligence? Just like CSEs, there are 4. So there's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. If we're good at all 4 of these things, then we'll be emotionally intelligent or emotionally mature. So if we are self-aware, this is probably the hardest to tackle. We understand how we're feeling, we can describe our emotions, and we know how is it affecting others. That's really hard to do. Think about when you're really upset. I'll share something with y'all. I have anger issues that I'm getting better at as I get older. However, I'll tell you, when I get really angry, it's hard to think logically and say like, you know what? I'm just getting upset here and that's not called for. I need to chill out. Because at that point, I'm trying to break something because I've lost the ability to use logic and reason. So developing self-awareness, particularly before emotions take control, is really helpful because you can stop things from escalating if you're able to pinpoint and say, this is unjustified. Self-management. Once we are aware of what we're feeling, are we able to control what we're feeling? So we can use certain habits like mindfulness. I know we've mentioned that a few times. That can help you regulate your emotions or take control before the emotions take control of you. Social awareness. So this includes empathy. It's probably the best descriptor of this one. If we can understand how others feel, we can use that to our advantage. How do y'all think understanding others' emotions will help you if you're a manager? Can you think of any situations that would be beneficial? Really? Yeah, so if you're a manager, how can being aware of your employees' emotions help you out?
Makes it easier to connect to them, like understand them, if it's something you want, you know, to that, then it's like it's something to become. So, and people, so, because all the others, and then and then I think it was
Yeah, kind of like, yeah, yeah, that's a good example. If the manager shows compassion, maybe they'll return compassion in turn. Cool. Sorry about your friend's dad. Miguel, did you have something to add? Yeah, definitely. It helps a lot. Think about when you're giving someone a performance evaluation. If someone's looking at you like this the whole time, like, and you're saying like, I think we need to work on your performance. It's like clearly they don't like what you're saying and you're not reaching them. So maybe you need to step back and take a different approach. So you got to be able to read the social cues there. Last is relationship management. So if you can use these effectively, if you're aware of your own emotions, if you're aware of others' emotions, then you can use that to help maintain your relationships. So for example, showing compassion to your employee, that goes a long way. All right, this is a super useful skill to develop. We already answered this question. Yes, it's very helpful to have emotional intelligence as a manager. All right. I think what I want to do is get through a few more slides. We'll get done a little early today, but I want to cover a little bit more. We're going to start to talk about organizational behavior. We might get through attitudes and we'll call it a day. This is one of my favorite sections, by the way, because this is the focus of my PhD. Organizational behavior is essentially the same thing as organizational psychology. So if you understand what drives people, then you can use that to motivate them to work harder and build better relationships with them. So a lot of cool stuff in this one as well. This whole section we'll refer to falling under the umbrella of organizational behavior, or OB. It focuses on individual and group behavior to explain and predict how and why people will act. How do you think that's useful for organizations? Should be a pretty easy one. Understanding why and how people act. Eric? Yeah, I think you're thinking from the employee's perspective, but you're absolutely right. If I'm the manager, I think like, all right, I need to get to know this person so I can see like, where are they going to be a best fit? Where can I leverage their potential? Where can I motivate them to work the hardest? That's exactly right. All right, this figure on the right. We're going to focus more on the informal stuff here. So the values, attitudes, we already talked about personalities. Let's talk about values, attitudes, and behavior, and how that all results from the informal side of the organization. All right, so we've discussed values before when we talked about ethics. Remember, we talked about values are the things that you strive for in life, your desired outcomes, and then ethics are kind of how you think is the most appropriate manner to achieve your valued outcomes. Values play a big role in determining employee behavior. In general, they're pretty stable throughout an individual's life. So as a kid, you might have valued, I don't know, family time. In general, you would also value family time as an adult. Unless you go through some significant life-altering events. They tend to be pretty stable. If you're a manager, it's good to know what your employees value because that will help us explain why they behave in certain ways. So I have a question for y'all. You can think about things you value or things you think others value. What do you think people tend to value in the workplace? What are some common employee values? Eileen? Did you say respect? Yeah, respect is huge. Oh, compensation. Yeah, how much you get paid. That's a big one too. Compensation? That's like, yeah. Oh, compassion? Exchange? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'll take that. Communication? You mean like they value, what kind of communication might they value? I don't like having relationships with them, you mean? Yeah. That's something my wife values a lot. She like goes to work and she has coworkers she likes to talk to. And when she's having a shitty day, sometimes that helps a lot. Having people you can talk to. All right. Yeah, there's a lot of things we value. There's a lot of research on values at work. If tend to clump them into 8 categories that are altruism, relationships, pay, prestige, security, authority, variety, and autonomy. So these are all different things we can value. If you're not familiar with altruism, I think that's a word I didn't learn until I was like 21 years old. Essentially, it's if you're altruistic, you are giving towards others without concern about what you gain in return. Somebody who's selfless, we would call them altruistic. Some people value that at work. They value, for example, being able to work at a soup kitchen where they can give back to others without a reward. Prestige might be a word we're not as familiar with. So like if I care about getting the highest title, If I want to be the CEO because that makes me look good to others, that would be prestige that I'm concerned about. It's very similar to authority. I might want to be the CEO just because it looks good. That means I care about prestige. Or I might want to be CEO because I want to be in control of everything. If I'm a control freak, that means I value authority. All right, the real question here, we don't have to memorize these 8 values. That's irrelevant. What we should think about as a manager is what? Why should we care about people's values? Eileen? Yes, that's exactly it. So if I understand what my people want, then I can give them what will make them fulfilled. Remember we talked about compensation last week? We said, what's the best form of compensation? And it's not always the highest pay. It's not always the best benefits. It's what people want. So if you listen to what people want, in this case, if we listen to what people value, then we can hopefully help them achieve their values. That's the answer. Their values tell us what motivates them. All right, I wanted to include one other external research article that I think is really cool. This is what a lot of the value research is based on. This is from a 1992 study that was done in a lot of cultures around the world. So Western cultures, Eastern cultures, cultures in Africa. They looked at how do people value different things, and is there some universal set of values that we can use to describe all humans? You probably can't read this very well, can you? But it's in the slides. I put it in the slides so you can look at it later. What I think is really cool about it is it shows you how, what are there, 10 of these? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10. He said there's 10 groups of values that help define people and how they behave, and they tend to cluster around each other. So for example, these descriptors, conformity, tradition, security, these might describe somebody with a conservative viewpoint, an American Republican. They definitely value tradition and conformity. So they demonstrate behaviors like obedience, respect for tradition, devout. A lot of them are devout in their religion. Politeness, you might describe the American South as polite. Okay. And on the other side of things, you might say that an American liberal is about universalism, which includes equality, broad-mindedness, a world at peace, social justice, maybe self-direction. They're independent. They value freedom and creativity. So what's interesting about this is it shows how the values tend to map together, and how if we look at someone's behavior, we can start to guess what is it they value. So if I see someone who's really all about social justice and inner harmony and protecting the environment, they probably value this universalism aspect. Cool. All right, that's all nice to know. This will not be on the final exam, just to be clear, but I included that for y'all to look at in case you think it's interesting. All right, let's look at 2 more slides here. Attitudes and behavior. So attitudes are our feelings about things, how we feel about objects, people, and events. They affect how we act towards others. So for example, if I think my boss is a jerk, in Norelli's example, if my boss doesn't respect my bereavement, then I'm not going to respond well to them. I'm not going to work hard for them. In fact, I'll take off extra days when they're working. There is this term you might be familiar with called cognitive dissonance. This one's pretty interesting. It says that if you are forced to act in a way that's incompatible with your attitudes, if your attitudes and your behavior are not in sync, it causes you to be stressed out. That's basically what cognitive dissonance is internal stress from the conflict. And as an example, let's say you're a Jewish employee and you're forced to work on the Sabbath, which if you're Jewish, you know it's like a religious mandate that you should not work on the Sabbath. So you feel really conflicted to be forced to work. But let's say your boss says, if you don't come in, you're going to be fired. That'll be very stressful for that employee. As managers, we should know that if we force people into cognitive dissonance, they're going to be very dissatisfied and they're not going to stick around very long. So we want to avoid that at all costs. All right. The last part here is we got to think about how values and attitudes affect behavior. That's kind of the ultimate goal of organizational behavior, is understanding why people act the way they do based on their values and their attitudes. So first is understanding that it does affect behavior. That behavior is a consequence of values and attitudes. So as an example for y'all, if you came to class today, if you came to class on time, again, thank you. But what values and attitudes do you think would drive that kind of behavior showing up to class? Eric? All right, so do you value getting your attendance grade? That's something we value. We want to get an A. Are there any other attitudes and values that could just influence that behavior? Carissa? Yeah, making sure you're staying on top of things so you understand. Maybe some people want to be here because they want to learn. That'd be cool. I like to think y'all come because you enjoy the class. And if you didn't, you might not come even if there was a required grade. So whatever the reason, if I'm the manager in this situation, I want to identify why is it people are coming versus not coming, or working hard versus not working hard, because then I can try to make changes to influence better behavior. All right. I think that's a good place to stop today. We'll finish on Thursday. Oh, sorry. Thank you for being on time today, and I'll see y'all on Thursday. Peace, Larry.
Great to be here today.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.